Hello and welcome to this week's first edition of the Evening Review. My name is Toiwan Jabela, your host for tonight. Let's look at today's front page. Now, one of the biggest events of the weekend was the rain, which has really poured heavily in parts of the country. And our readers and viewers have been sending us clips of how it did in their areas. And we have compiled for you some of these clips as they follow.
Oké, jullie moeten de kant staan, alle trek was nou. Guys, come here. Let's get it snapped.
You're gonna push the car out.
The phones might be in.
Oh, la cuetuire ni mutaro mea. Mea iri mocha cacho mupo. Poni ma esi muetengana na tema mo mea. O mea ane tema mo mea esi muete mataranga. O kombinga yo komunja. O baranga no MPC kare afika konina. Mefukuro sonda kanina o mea ea mokaru kandaka ke po munja kapo skorai. Skorai mufa naskan.
So tonight on the show we are accompanied by presidential spokesperson Dr Alfredo Hengari, who is here to talk to us about just a few things around the office of the president. Good evening, sir. Welcome to the show.
Good evening. Thank you, Trevor, for having me on your show.
Sure.
And congratulations on a very good show.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to hear it's our little contribution towards just, making sure that news comes in different platforms and in different ways. So thank you very much for joining us.
Indeed.
Yeah, maybe to get into this, we are in March now. And within a few days' time, President Hage Geingob would be inaugurated for his second term.
That is correct, in 19 days.
In 19 days, to be specific. Mm-hmm. Looking back to the past 5 years, I know that you joined the presidency halfway as a spokesperson of the president. But of course, you've been keeping tabs from the very beginning of his term to date. What would you say have been his key achievements in the past 5 years?
Everything rests on leadership.
Yeah.
President Geingob was inaugurated as head of state on the 21st of March, 2015. Mm-hmm. And when you look at the economic statistics, mm-hmm, for that year, and the revisions that have been made last year by the Namibia Statistics Agency, last year, I think December or so, mm-hmm, they actually tell us a picture that is far worse than the one we have seen. Mm-hmm. So President Geingob became head of state at a very difficult time. Mm-hmm. During a difficult period, how you treat the most vulnerable citizens is a clear marker of the leadership that you provide.
Yeah.
During this difficult period, President Geingob took a decision that the vulnerable sectors of this population must be adequately protected against the worst excesses of an economy that was not growing. And we know why the economy was not growing. We've had the global commodity cycle busting. So we're getting less money for our commodities. And of course that has an impact on revenue. So what President Geingob did, the bold decisions he took over the past 5 years, one of them is to declare war against poverty. To say we have to eradicate poverty. Not just alleviate, as has been the discourse over the years, over the decades, to eradicate poverty. And in that very same year, the United Nations adopted the Sustainable Development Goals. The number one goal is eradicating poverty. So the president was visionary enough to say this thing can be eradicated. Now, how do you eradicate poverty? You eradicate poverty through protecting the most vulnerable sectors of the population. Our pensioners were living on $600 Namibian per month. The president doubled that pension. And that acts as a very important buffer against poverty. So they have more money in their pockets. They are able to look after the grandchildren. They are able to look after their immediate families.
So you enumerated the social interventions that the president has embarked upon, but there's also an argument by some sectors to say that has actually been one of the mothers of our challenges at the moment, because we started investing more in social safety nets and ignore to invest in the productive sectors to help stimulate growth and create jobs. How do you react to that?
That is incorrect, because the private sector is the engine of growth. Government creates a conducive environment. In Namibia, we have a conducive environment for the private sector to flourish. That's the role of government, is to create the conducive environment, and the private sector must play its role. Each and every one of us must be in our respective place. Government creates the conducive environment, the private sector seizes opportunities. But even so, the president has been an investment champion over the past 5 years. Whenever he travels outside the country, he makes sure that he speaks to investors. We organize, as a government, investment roadshows. All these things are part of the president's arsenal in terms of making sure that our economy grows. So that's the role of the president. But in terms of creating jobs, the private sector has a very, very important role to play. So I think it's a bit unfair to have that expectation on the part of government, because we should not forget that we are also coming from a legacy of apartheid, where blacks were excluded from opportunities. And in some instances, you know, when people say, or some of you in the private sector, when you say, well, the government bureaucracy is large, it's also part of we have a responsibility to preserve peace in this country. We have a responsibility to be inclusive in this country. So in some of those cases, there has been, of course, I mean, the government is, but you cannot just throw people on the streets. You are creating more misery for them. So there is a delicate balance that must be maintained, and the president has been focused on maintaining that balance. As he always says, when you're in the private sector, you're focused on the bottom line, making profits. The president's role is peace, stability, and of course prosperity. But you maintain peace also by keeping people in jobs, by giving them opportunities. So that's where government is. And I think there's a need for greater appreciation of the efforts of the president in preserving that balance, making sure that Namibia is stable, we don't throw people out on the streets, when we, as government, have a responsibility to protect Namibians against some of the worst excesses of capitalism.
Okay. Okay. So you mentioned at the very beginning the state of the economy at the beginning of the president's term, and I get you are hinting at the timing of his presidency having been a bit unfortunate for him. But how much responsibility is President Geingob prepared to take in terms of the current economic situation in the country? Of course, there are global forces, but how much responsibility is he prepared to say the decline in the economy and the losses of jobs? This I am prepared as head of state, as a responsible head of state, to take a portion of that blame.
The president has. The president is not someone who shies away from difficulties. The president, by acting with specific interventions in order to remedy the situation, is a clear demonstration of responsible leadership. I spoke to you earlier about the social protection, because there are Namibians who are hurting because of the economy, and they have to be protected. That's taking responsibility. There are specific interventions in certain sectors. For example, the emphasis on technical and vocational training on the part of the president, which is something very important under the Harambee Prosperity Plan, because the president constantly emphasizes that it's not you social scientists who grow economies, but it's technical people. The investment in that sector over the past 5 years, where targets have been exceeded in terms of getting a number of Namibians in TVET centers, is quite remarkable. You don't talk sufficiently about it. The target was 18,000. It's close to 30,000 over this period. So that's important in terms of the growth prospects of our economy, and also giving young people an opportunity to become self-employed. The amount of monies that are being spent on higher education generally, it's something also that we as Namibians ought to be proud of. There are countries where when you finish high school, you are on your own. In this country, higher education is almost fully subsidized by government. The amounts being spent on scholarships, on grants, you're looking at, just last year, looking at close to 2 billion. So,
but that is where the challenge is.
The investment in young people in this country, notwithstanding the challenge of youth unemployment, is quite consequential. So you cannot fault government on that score.
I think the challenge that I have, Dr. Hengari, there is, you have this system that gets our young people educated. Some school abroad, some go to local universities and get their qualifications. And for the first time in almost the country's history, during our time at university, the first people who got jobs after finishing university were nurses, were school teachers, were doctors. Now you see those groups actually toying on the streets. That is not a good sign of success.
The reality is that we are getting more students in higher education, and the job market is not able to absorb some of them. So, without question, that speaks to the need for diversification of the economy, and also the type of skills that are required for the job market. So it's a question for higher education institutions and, of course, government to rethink. The president is constantly talking about the fourth industrial revolution. He was the first in this country to talk about it as an important public policy choice. We have to adapt as a country because the old jobs that existed yesterday are going to be destroyed. So we need to be ready for the fourth industrial revolution with robotics, automation. These are things that the president continues to emphasize, that we need to rethink. And especially in this year of introspection, there's a need to discard old ways that have not been working and embrace the new. The president, in his New Year's speech, spoke about business unusual. It's about all these things. For us as a country to think, to introspect, and to plan for a better future for all of us.
Not only as a spokesperson of the president, you are also a political scientist yourself. To what do you attribute the reduction in the votes of both the president and the ruling party? Is that not speaking to a sense by the public that the performance has not been up to standard?
There's something that is critical to emphasize here, Trivo. You are a social scientist yourself. What matters here is that Namibians, who are the ultimate sovereigns, express themselves in favor of continuity. They said President Geingob must continue and do the way that he's been doing. That is what history will retain. That's what we should retain. You don't govern with. You need a simple majority to be elected president of this country. And in light of the economic conjuncture, I think we need to emphasize the fact that we have a democratically elected president. The party that he leads is a majority party in parliament. He has a clear mandate to rule this country. And of course, I mean, when you have been in power for 5 years relative to when you're being elected, these are two different things. But Namibians were fully appreciative enough to say, President Geingob, you have done enough for us as Namibians, for us to entrust you with the affairs of the state for the next 5 years. That's the focus. The president is investing same energy, same determination in his work on the basis of that clear mandate from the Namibian people.
Okay. But as someone who works closely with him on a daily basis, does he look like a man who has absorbed the meaning of that reduction in votes? Is he humble to say there's a message being sent here, and I ought to do better, to do even better in the second half? In the second, I'm a football guy. Second half, in the second term, is he humble enough to accept that there's a message that is being sent there by the people?
In 2014, 87% of Namibians voted for President Geingob. And he accepted that message with a lot of humility. And understood fully the level of responsibility that rests on his shoulders and the level of expectations on the part of Namibians. In 2020, when the president reflected about November 2019, to craft this year as the year of introspection is of course about the past 30 years because it's a milestone. But it's also on the basis of the expressions of the Namibian people to say we need to think as a nation collectively, and the president is the first to accept and to champion that level of introspection. When he said it's not business as usual, you should recall that the very first statement the president delivered following that the elections of last year were to the Central Committee of the ruling party. There was a lot of introspection in that statement to say that as a party there's a need to do better. And on the 31st of December, when the president delivered his New Year's message, when the president said he has had Namibians
Yes.
around certain issues that needs to be done.
Mm-hmm.
That's humility, and a lot of humility.
Mm.
So we cannot have a discussion whether the president understands where Namibia is or not. He's the
Yeah.
first to understand that.
Okay.
That the past 30 years, there are things that have been done, many positive things, that you and I can attest to, but maybe you don't talk sufficiently about those things.
Yes.
We have infrastructure that is excellent. Even during the past 5 difficult years, civil servants in this country are paid on time. The roads are maintained. When traffic lights are broken, we fix them in this country. So there are many things that we do excellently well in Namibia. And over the past 5 years, the successes are many.
Yes.
We've gotten more Namibians into higher education institutions than at any point in our history. We've gotten more young Namibians into schools than at any point in our history. These are things that Namibia denied. We've gotten more Namibians who were disadvantaged before to participate meaningfully in the economy. So these are things that we as Namibians ought to be proud of. And the past 5 years have, without question, been very critical, notwithstanding an economy that has not been doing well, but we've been able to maintain all these infrastructures.
Okay.
In fact, we've been able to add more roads into our network. We've been able to expand a port that is serving other landlocked countries in this region where they become sea-linked. So these are many positive developments that occurred in the past 5 years under difficult circumstances, but I think it's a clear demonstration that the ship has a captain.
Okay.
And Namibians last year said the captain must continue.
Yeah. Okay. A lot of people are describing this upcoming term of the president as a legacy term for President Geingob. Is that sort of the attitude that he has adopted also towards that term himself?
The president is, I think, one good thing about the president is that he spends a lot of time thinking, reading, reflecting, and he's also the first one to understand what this term means to him. And also on the basis of his own experience as a leader, President Geingob will change when there's a need to change. So the next 5 years, as a journalist, I think you must have first the New Year's message.
Yes, I did.
And then the opening statement to cabinet, where the president clearly emphasized some of the priorities going forward.
Yes.
With a clear understanding as to what needs to be done for Namibians. The president is not a populist. That's one good thing about him. He's not a populist. The president understands that the things that need to be done, they must be done. At times the cost could be high on an individual at an individual level, but the president will always do what is in the best interest of Namibians and the country at large.
Okay. The second last question, Doctor, is corruption. The president, during the 5 years of the president's term, we have seen 3 cabinet ministers actually leaving cabinet. One, of course, they all resigned, but due to issues related to accusations of corruption. And I remember there's a statement that you issued last year, around July, if I'm not mistaken, when Minister Katrina Hase-Imarwa resigned, and your statement said she was going to be relieved of her duties anyways if she didn't jump ship on her own. Then we have now Saki Shangala is a former minister, and Bernard Dessa also leaving. Of course, there were some rhetoric that I think upset a lot of people, such as these two ministers being thanked for patriotism and all that. But that is not the point. The point is this an indication of President Geingob's sort of drive to weed out corruption in the country? How much role did he play in having some of these ministers chucked out of cabinet and having to answer the difficult questions related to corruption?
You will recall that in 2015, 2016, when the president assumed office,
yes,
there was a tender that was inflated.
Yes.
And when the president picked up that this tender is inflated, he was the first to call it out, to say this is not acceptable for Namibian taxpayers. It's their monies.
Yeah.
Cancelled it. People went to court, to the High Court. The government lost in that round. No, the government won.
Lost in the High Court first.
Yeah, lost in the High Court and appealed. The Supreme Court gave government reason.
Yes.
Now, that's determination to fight corruption.
Yeah.
The president could have, elsewhere, I mean, they could have ignored it, but not President Geingob. That's because the president, when he came into office, one of the priorities, you will also recall, was the fight against corruption. And tangibly, that's tangible now. You don't talk about it enough. You don't use it as an example because it's too positive. You don't use it as an example. Now, when you're in a country where ministers are relieved of their duties because of allegations, because they're implicated in acts of corruption, it speaks to the quality of governance, doesn't it? You would agree with me that it does.
Fair enough.
Because there are countries where ministers don't resign. So your ability to fight corruption is reflected in the quality of institutions.
Yeah.
Now, in this country, that's the quality of institutions we are talking about. The president always emphasizes processes, systems, and institutions. Now, you as media practitioners, as journalists, you ought to be the first to embrace the fact that this country is one of the best governed countries in Africa by any indicator. But there's something more important in the actions of the president, and that is to say we have to continue improving as a country. The quality of our institutions, the quality of our systems and process must continue to improve in order to arrest some of these social ills. So there's no question about the standing of President Geingob vis-a-vis corruption. It's something that is applauded globally. Maybe you don't do that, you don't do enough of that. As a journalist, a country cannot have the freest press if it is not fighting corruption.
Okay.
Press freedom it goes hand in hand with the quality of institutions, the quality of governance. You should be the ones to make that liaison, but you don't. You are trying to look at these things as if they are isolated. No, they are not. They are interrelated. You don't have the freest press on a continent if you don't have quality institutions, if the quality of governance is not good. And by every indicator that you can look at the World Bank, you can look at Freedom House, all of them, they have the same story to tell about institutions in Namibia. And as journalists, I think at times where you should come in, where we advise humbly that you should come in, is also to educate the Namibian public.
Fair enough.
You know, there are erroneous things being said, you have the responsibility to take a stand. A wrong is wrong, irrespective of who commits it. Something is not just wrong because it's government.
Yes.
When the public is, you know, when there are individuals in the public who are saying certain things, you know, people must just be jailed summarily. No, you have to emphasize the rule of law. That in Namibia, we have rule of law. Institutions should be allowed to carry out their duties. So I think these are some of the things where, as practitioners, you have to come in. But I think overall, the performance of the president over the past 5 years has been positive, and that is amply reflected in a vote of confidence on the part of Namibians, because the president said this is a year of accountability. Yes. And accounted to Namibians, consulted widely through town hall meetings, and they returned the same president to office. So yes, it's a measure. Okay. It's a measure of success.
Sure. Doctor, we wish the president the best of luck in his next term, because for us it's elementary stuff to actually understand that when the head of state succeeds, it means well for the country. So we wish him all the best for the next time, and thank you very much for coming through today. We'll talk to you very soon again.
Thank you very much, and let's talk about the success as well.
Yeah, we'll keep doing that. We'll keep doing that. That was Dr. Alfredo Hengari, the spokesperson of President Hage Geingob, speaking to us about what he thinks has been or have been the successes of President Hage Geingob during the past 5 years, and many other topics. There you have it for tonight. We'll be back tomorrow again, same time. Good night.